Deputy Connolly. Thanks, Deputy.
Thank you very much. It's been very interesting, and I appreciate your openness. I also appreciate the gender representation here. It's overwhelming.
On our side as well.
Just taking up on the public-private partnership, I have to say my experience as a public representative on what was the VEC doesn't reassure me that there is value for money with public-private partnership. I hear you reassuring me. Obviously, it's a bit like David and Goliath here in the sense of what we have to go through to try and look at and take the help of the Controller and Auditor General, and then going on my experience. And I remember being on that committee, and it was a mantra that public-private partnership was better. But that mantra actually wasn't backed up by any evidence. And when some evidence did come before us, it was shown that the direct build of schools was much cheaper, much more cost effective. So it's been said by Deputy Cullinan and raised by the chairperson, so I fully support that. It concerns me that the Controller and Auditor General has said, despite a statutory obligation, that there's been no look back on any of these public and private partnerships. That's red alert at this point. And second red alert is he doesn't have staff to do that. So reassurances from you, while they're welcome, they don't reassure me in that sense. I really would like to see it in plain English for me so I can explain to the taxpayers out there who pay tax. So that's number one. And if we just stay on that then in relation to the public-private partnerships, what's the up-to-date status on the transfer of public-private partnerships from the NDM, the National Development Finance Agency, to the new transport infrastructure, the TIA? What is the status of those? How many are there? Where are they at?
Maybe firstly on the gender issue, Deputy, apologies there. And
it's tongue in cheek, but
but it's an important issue. And the NTMA is the 50% of the staff are female, and it's 70-30 in terms of what we call senior management, and we've just launched a gender balance initiative to try and see if what other biases might exist in the organisation.
Those figures are all the more worrying, given that there's no gender balance at the top table. But in any event, in terms of TII and the NDFA, so the procurement side of the NDFA, which has got its financial advisory side and its procurement side, is set to merge with TII. That's right.
And those discussions are ongoing, and legislation will be needed, to go through. So that could be an issue in terms of timing. But discussions are taking place. There's a working group with DPER, Department of Transport, and the NDFA, and they're looking at moving that forward, and we're talking to staff. So about 40 staff out of the 60 staff in the NDFA will be affected by that, and it's been a very uncertain environment for them because this has been in the public domain now for a number of years. So we've got to manage a group of staff who are currently working on some very significant projects while their future is uncertain. So we'd be anxious to move everything through as quickly as possible.
So it hasn't happened. There's been no transfer at all yet.
No, it needs legislation, but the working group is set up, and that's.
And is there a time frame for that?
There is a time frame. I think probably we're talking about 12 months from now before it'll be executed.
Okay, thanks very much. Now, in relation to the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, are you in a position to answer questions on that?
No, we only provide outsourced services. That has its own board,
yes,
and its own chief executive.
And does that come under our remit?
Yes.
Yes, because there are serious questions there for us in relation to the drawn down of funds. Because obviously, again, it's my experience in Galway, and I think it reflects nationally, of the crisis, no funding for small to medium enterprises, and that's one of their main functions here, isn't it? But there's not been a great drawdown on that, which raises questions from what I'm reading here.
Yeah.
The 2015 annual report has just been published this morning, yes, so it's laid before the House of the Oireachtas this morning.
On this particular? On the
SBCI.
Yes.
And I think it showed, sorry, I don't have those figures with me because it's, as Conor O'Kelly was saying, it's separate. I think 192 million drawdown may have been the end 2015, but I have to double check.
And what was that figure out of then, that 192 drawdown? of the funds available?
It's approximately 750 million, but it takes time from commitment to draw down. Essentially, almost all of the 750 have now been...
Almost all that money has been committed to the platform, so therefore that's the first step in drawing it down. The actual drawdown figures are the money actually going out to the SMEs. Yeah. But it's
what is the time lapse between that being committed and being drawn down?
It depends on which institution, but it could be 6 to 9 months. For the on-lenders like the banks, AIB's, Bank of Ireland, Ulster Bank, it's faster, and they're already set up. But for some of the non-bank lending platforms, it is a little bit slower.
But that's as much as you can put that.
Deputy, the annual report and financial statements will be presented, and I expect when we come back in autumn that will be one of the ones listed, and at that stage it would be open to the committee, SBCI, Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, and it will be open to the committee to call them if you wish.
Okay. And then in relation to the State Claims Agency, I think you said there were 50 periodic payments. Is that right?
That's correct.
And out of that, 30 have reverted back?
No, 13.
13, I beg your pardon. 13. So they've reverted back to full payments because of the absence of legislation?
Yeah.
All right. Now, I should also congratulate you. You've got a clean audit on everything from the auditor. So, obviously, our questions are not in relation to the auditing of accounts. They're in relation to your role and your function and queries around that. So, if we come to the one recommendation from the Controller and Auditor General in relation to the state, your agency was the 20% margin of comfort that you allowed, that you overestimate the liability by a 20% margin of comfort. And he recommended that you change that and you base it more on statistical probabilities and by informed analysis of outcomes of previous cases. Has that recommendation been taken on board?
It has, Deputy. There are two parts to it. The prudential margin, as we call it, which is a conventional insurer provision that they do. Just to explain why we had it there and what its purpose is, when you set a reserve on a case, the case can deteriorate over time, or indeed our reports, which might be medical reports in relation to a plaintiff, might be more favourable in terms of outcome than, for example, their own reports. So you can get a deteriorating picture. It's also to allow for the fact that any precedent case might set, for example, new levels of damages. And currently there's, for example, some active debate in the court about the cap on general damages, whether that should be brought up. So that margin was there for that. Our actuaries, who are an independent firm of actuaries in London and who adjudicate all of our schemes, our indemnity schemes, and provide advice on it, advise us to maintain it, but to incorporate the Controller and Auditor General's statistical probability model as well. So effectively what we're doing is we're marrying the two models in terms of our reserve setting. And you might just be happy to know that our actuaries indicated that on a look-back basis from our inception to now, when they look at what we reserved and what outcome was, that in fact they said we got it right over the period.
Okay, well, I'll let the Controller and Auditor General maybe come in later and comment in relation to that, whether he's happy that his recommendation has been taken on board. In relation to the risk assessment, and again in a different light, my experience was that the risk wasn't managed well by the Health Executive and by the hospitals, and risks could have been avoided. And I think you're taking a proactive approach in relation to that, number one. And number two, early apologies. And to the vast majority of these cases, I think it's 75% are to do with medical negligence, are they?
Yes.
Yeah, that figure. So it's an extraordinarily high figure of the overall claims. And it seems to me that very often, in addition to compensation, quite clearly, which is necessary, what was necessary was an early acknowledgement. So two questions there. What risk assessment improvements have been made? Could you comment on that for me? And also the necessity for an early apology.
We have a unit, a clinical risk management unit, which is headed up by a doctor, and that unit comprises medical practitioners, nurses and allied healthcare professionals. And one of the objects of what they are carrying out is they do two things. They carry out site visits to hospitals, and it's kind of an audit really of what a hospital is doing and how it's managing its clinical risk, objectively looked at by them. And also critically they look at the lessons learned from looking at closed claims and how they translate, what were the functional deficits in terms of clinical risk, and feed them back into the system. So if you look at obstetric risk, which even though it's only accounting for 25% in terms of claims volume, it can be as high as 60% in terms of payouts. So we've concentrated largely on that area, and we are just finishing now a review of the 19 maternity hospitals around the country, where we've looked at them from a best practice point of view in terms of obstetric medicine and some of the deficits that we might have identified and so on. So that's a very active area of our business, and we're constantly doing that. We do it on the non-clinical side as well with all other state authorities. And your second question then, Deputy, was...
Apologies.
Oh, the apologies, yeah. We, with the HSE, a number of years ago, initiated an open disclosure project. And we had two pilot hospitals, which originally was the Mercy Hospital in Cork and then the Mater Hospital in Dublin. That's been expanded right throughout the hospitals. So we advocate that doctors should apologise where there's error and indicate what they're doing about it in terms of the future, what lessons have been learned and so on. But, it can be complex on occasion, because if you can imagine, say, where a child is born and there are clearly problems ab initio, the cause or exactly what happened is not amenable to an immediate discussion. But we've advocated that even in those circumstances, doctors should be having, very open discussions with the parents of the child, and to look to the reasons why a combination of things may have happened. So this is something that is a project which we have expanded over a period of time, and there's no reason why in cases where there's absolutely clear error that hospitals wouldn't admit to that error and apologise for it.
Yes, certainly. How has that been monitored, that policy now, that the actual apology is coming earlier and that there's open discussion?
We just had a report, well, the HSE have just had a report carried out by a former doctor who used to be with the Medical Protection Society, looking at how good the project is and what are the aspects of it that would need to be fine-tuned further. And that report was delivered only a matter of weeks ago to the HSE.
So those two reports, I think, of the maternity hospitals and that one you just mentioned, they'll be available publicly, will they?
Yes. We published a report, in fact, last year, which was a look back over 5 years at clinical incident reporting in relation to maternity and obstetrics. And that's going to be our pattern in the future, of producing reports on, different areas of where there are just clinical reporting generally.
Just finally on that area, this particular area, there was a reduction of a saving of 42% in legal costs after you went back and looked at it. Again, that's to be welcomed. But how did you manage that? And 42% is huge. Were they well over in their estimates of costs, or what?
Well, maybe if I could give you an example of it, Deputy. There are two aspects, obviously, to our costs. There are our own costs of our own solicitors and barristers, and then we have the plaintiff's costs. And we had a case where the professional fee of a plaintiff's solicitor was $485,000 in a catastrophic injury case, and we couldn't get any agreement, so we went to the taxation of cost system, and that was ultimately reduced to $267,000. And that was appealed further to the High Court, and was affirmed by the High Court that that was the proper reduction. Unfortunately, the Court of Appeal has now indicated that they've set aside that judgment, so that might have an effect. But that particular case had a fairly dramatic effect in terms of the number of settled costs that we got over a period of time. In relation to our own costs, we carried out a procurement of barristers, where we got them to tender in an open tender competition. We imposed caps and limits, and we did the same with our own solicitors. And the combined effect of all of those things has driven down costs. But it's a never difficult challenge for us, and I couldn't say to you, Deputy, that given what's happened in this latest Court of Appeal decision, that we'll always be as successful as we have been over the last period. In fact, you may see costs rise if this decision has effect, particularly in relation to lower and medium value cases.
Thank you. Just moving on to another area in terms of investment, and obviously you said your role is in managing the debt and all of that, but you have another role in investing money throughout the world. And in fact, I was staggered, and again, I don't come from a financial background, but I was staggered at the amount of investment. And I looked at the risk assessment, and risk assessment is major for you. So my question is, climate change, has that come into your risk assessment? And then I'm going to look at your investments in fossil fuel. Now, I won't to delay, Chair, but it really is worth reading out one or two little items in relation to climate change and our commitment to staying under the 2%. And I think I just find it for you, sorry. The Economist Intelligence Unit, a major piece of research in 2015, the cost of inaction. And it goes on to state the cost of inaction way outweighs the cost of action. Mark Carney, the governor of the central bank in England, the challenge currently posed by climate change pale in significance compared with what might come. Once climate change becomes a defining issue for financial stability, it may already be too late. And so it goes on, and there's a report here by an advisory committee to the European Systemic Risk Board in relation to the risk posed by climate change, and Hank Paulson, the former US Treasury. I've many more quotes, I won't quote them, highlighting the climate change risk. Where does that feature in any of this, number one? Number two, why are you still investing in fossil fuels? Have you made a decision to change that, or are you reviewing your policy? So I'll start there with that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Deputy. That's all. It's a very live issue in investment markets, clearly, and we have looked at it and are continuing to look at it. I suppose our first decision is around the transfer of money from the MPRF, those investments into the new strategic investment fund. So they were already investments with fund managers. We're not directly investing in those stocks ourselves. We're investing in fund managers who are ongoing investing in those stocks. The mandate that we give them is, can change at the time that you put out the money and at various stages, throughout the year or the period. What's happening in reality is that all that money's been transferred and liquidated and put back into the strategic investment fund. That is currently undergoing what is called the global transition strategy. So that's a portfolio transition strategy. So its investment mandate has changed very significantly. The risk that we used to take in terms of the kind of investments we made has changed significantly anyway. And now the money is going through this new transition process. It'll come out essentially in three buckets. One will be a very liquid cash bucket. The next bucket will have kind of short-term government bonds and be kind of semi-liquid, if you like. And then the third one will have a little bit more risk, which could have some of those equity exposures in it. In that case, we will be subscribing to the latest global protocols in relation to investment, including fossil fuels and the environment. But we've made a decision not to proactively force or ask, because it would literally be impractical for us to do so given the mandate and given the transition that's currently going on. But I think in the new settled portfolio, it will subscribe to the latest global standards in relation to those areas. Sorry,
Chair, I'll finish on this one. I know. I couldn't be happy with that answer. climate change is the biggest risk we face. And I've asked you in relation to this report, which is very well produced and a lovely glossy document, where does climate change fit in there as identified as a risk in terms of going forward, in terms of, now you're telling me there's a transition. Do I understand you're going to move out of all of the, I mean, am I wrong when I look at this? And there are 55 different corporations that extract and or transport, that extract, transport or burn fossil fuels, and they come under your quoted debt instruments. Then under the quoted equities, we have 241 corporations that extract, transport or burn fossil fuels, significant investments in the world's tobacco corporations, and there's a whole list of them. There's questions over companies and companies that finance mercenary armies and so on. So these are year investments. You might be saying it's a legacy. So who makes the decisions in relation to the morality of these investments, number one, but even more importantly, or equally as important, in terms of climate change for these fossil fuel industries? And what date have you for stopping this? When is this going to stop? Is it being reviewed? Who's reviewing it?
Yeah, I mean, Deputy, as I said, I think they're totally fair points. I totally agree. And our decision has been that due to the logistics of the transition portfolio and strategy that's currently taking place and is literally live right now, that portfolio is being transitioned, that we will make sure that the new portfolio guidelines will subscribe to a higher standard in that regard than it has in the past.
The transition phase, you're not giving me a date on when it will be completed. And number two, you're not answering me as to how the risk of climate change as a serious economic risk, not to mention human or any other level, why it's not in this document as one of the major risk factors for year investments.
Could I reflect on that and come back to you?
You have an ethical investment policy. As in armaments manufacturing. I'm asking, do they have an ethical investment policy, as in armaments, tobacco, drugs, whatever? You must have something in this area, and obviously climate change must be coming into that overall picture.
That's correct.
So just what have you in that area, or what else do you need to expand that area by?
Currently, it's armaments is the only specifically restricted.
So you're still investing in tobacco?
Yes.
Irish taxpayers.
But as Conor explained, I think we're in the process of moving our legacy investments into kind of three buckets. The first bucket would be cash, the next bucket would be kind of credit-related instruments, and the residual would be kind of real estate and absolute return funds and other similar investments. So we do have an ethical and social responsibility policy, and I think the best thing is to send it on to the committee to clarify it more.
Clearly the process today has highlighted a lapse and a gap, which is extremely important. It doesn't feature here, and I appreciate your openness in answering that.
I take the point completely. I take the point completely on board, and we'll come back to it. The transition phase is sort of hiding behind words as to the impact of your decisions or your predecessors to invest in all of these companies, and your failure to put in the risk from climate change. I've taken time, Chairperson. No, I take the point on board.
You'll come back to us on that specific on this issue today.